Cool. Let's crack on. So we've got half an hour, obviously. So a few new faces here. So thanks for coming along. Yeah, this is B2B marketing shizzle. So we do this every fortnight. Have a particular topic. Have a kind of an expert in their field to talk about it, and then we open up to discussion. All within kind of half an hour. So a nice snappy session. In order to be able to get people back to their busy days. Today we've got Rin. Sorry, hi Rin.
Yeah, I like Grin. I'm going to keep that as my
Yeah,
name.
and today we're talking about harnessing subject matter experts for your business. So, yeah, Rin, it'd be great if you could take that away, and then we'll jump in and ask questions.
No worries. Okay, so hi, I'm Rin. So I run a strategic copywriting agency and consultancy, and we work primarily with expert-led businesses. We help them to clarify and communicate the messaging, and then to build their brand authority using content. So my usual talk about expertise is around 40 minutes. I'm going to give you the whirlwind tour, and I'm going to focus particularly on what you as marketers might need to know, because obviously it's a lot of stuff for subject matter experts to know, which is about how to harness the power of that expertise in the businesses that you work in. So to kind of lay a bit of a foundation, I feel like it's probably important to say that if you're going to position your brand around expertise in your business, there needs to be expertise in your business. And this is something that unfortunately you come across too often, where people are like, right, we want to be experts in our field. It's like, cool, where's the experience? And it's not really there. And you can't really fake expertise, or at least not for long. So, the brand itself can be new, but it may be the founder, the CTO, the CSO, the head of product, somebody in the business has got that depth of experience, the genuine stuff that you can draw on. So that's kind of the first one. If you think about an example of, say you've got two ed tech companies producing content about equity in primary education. If one of those ed tech companies, one of the co-founders is an ex-primary school headmaster or headmistress, they're going to have so much more to bring to that content than somebody that's sort of just making that sort of stuff up. So it's going to be more, richer and more substantial. So that's one, you've got to have the experts. And the second kind of common problem that we see is where there are experts, but they're siloed from marketing. So unfortunately, you have the marketers who've been tasked with creating the content, and they've got a superficial understanding. It's not that real depth that gives it the content weight. So it's really important that you don't have that silo between the two. But I'm assuming that because you're at this talk, one, there are subject matter experts in your business, and two, you actually do want to talk to them and work with them. So what challenges are you going to face? So there's 5 things I want to cover. The first one is that your subject matter experts probably aren't marketers, which means, unfortunately, you can't just say to them, like, write me a fantastic blog post full of your knowledge, because what you get back from them, even if they say yes and do it, is likely to be pitched at the wrong level, or it will be in a completely wrong tone of voice for your brand, especially if they're an academic based expert. They're going to be writing in a much more academic the way that you might want for your marketing. And also, chances are, even if they manage to get the right level and they've got a good tone of voice, it may not be strategic unless you've kind of really guided them. You will know, you've created your content strategy. You will know that you need to hit certain key business objectives or key business messages. And chances are that because they aren't the experts in marketing, that they won't be able to do that. So that's kind of one challenge, is a lot about marketing, but they might not. The second challenge is that they're busy, as you probably know if you work with any experts. And so A, getting them to write something for you is pretty much impossible. B, just getting them to work with you can be quite tricky as well. So you need to sell the benefits. That's kind of key. And again, remember, you're the marketing experts and they're not. So they may have no idea why expert-led content is so valuable. This is the kind of content that builds trust, it builds brand awareness, it builds that reputation and authority. And that's really powerful, but they might not see that. So it's really important to be able to kind of set out your case for why it is that you're creating this content, and really have some reasons for it. And then you need to make it really easy for them. So when people are busy, they like things to be simple and straightforward. So, could you have a monthly, quarterly even session with them where you draw out everything that you need to create that month or that content, quarter's worth of content? If you can get them to agree with that, great. And then you need to make sure that you show up to that session, you're really informed. So like, don't use that session to get the basics from them. Make sure that you know as much as you already can, and then you can use that session to get the real gold from them. So that's the stuff that only they know. They're the experiences, the anecdotes, the nuance in that will make that content stand out from something that somebody else has written who isn't an expert. Okay. I'm racing through this. It's good. Third one, too much knowledge. So the thing about experts is obviously they have a lot of knowledge in their head. And it's a little bit like, if you imagine a jumper, it is made of yarn. However, if I just presented you with a big tangle of yarn, that's not helpful. It's the same substance, but it's just presented in a different way. And so often when you talk to an expert, you just get this like pile of yarn out of their head, and it's not especially helpful. So also because they're enthusiasts, right? So they get really excited and they're like, oh, and this other thing, and then they start going down a rabbit hole. So our jobs as marketers and content creators is to, first of all, we need to have the pattern. That's the content strategy. And then we also need to kind of find the thread in that yarn. We need to untangle it. We need to kind of knit it together. And that's, asking the right questions of your experts, guiding them to what is going to be helpful for the particular piece of content you're creating. It's essentially an interview technique. I started life as a journalist. It does take a lot of practice, but, shutting down when they're going down that rabbit hole and sort of carefully bringing them back and just helping them to think through the way that their audience needs them to think, because that's your expertise. As marketers, we know what our audience is looking for. So yeah, asking questions, guiding. In some cases, a pre-brief can be very helpful. We do that with some of our clients. Some experts, especially though, the disc profile, if you don't go and have a read of it after, a lot of experts are in the C kind of category. So yeah, so they're very like attention to detail, very introverted. They like time to think and ponder when they're asking a question. And if you've only got a half-hour slot with them, it might be useful to get them to do that thinking before they come and talk to you. So that's kind of a useful one to do. A fourth challenge might be around, it's kind of similar, it's linked to this, and that's around unconscious competence. Again, I can talk about the subject for ages, but there's 4 levels of competence, and that top one is when you're so good at something or you're so knowledgeable about something that you just don't really realize that you're the expert. And a lot of these, experts in businesses are in that stage. So they either sort of jump in and start talking about something without explaining the context because they assume that everybody knows the context, or they miss some of the really relevant and interesting things that they could be talking about because they just don't, for them it's just ordinary, it's bog standard, and they don't realize that they need to be talking about it. So even as a journalist, I remember so often getting to the end of an interview and somebody would just do a throwaway comment, and that would be the hook for the whole story. So you've got to train your ear to listen out for that, and you've got to train yourself to dig through what your expert's saying. So helping them to identify what's interesting to their audience and to pitch it at the right level. Analogies are a good example of this. We do this a lot with our clients where they're explaining a really complex subject and we're like, that's not necessarily going to make sense to the audience. How can we work that out? And I wrote down one earlier about one of our clients is in embedded finance. So they were talking about the difference between encryption and tokenization. And what we ended up writing was, if encryption is the equivalent of hiding your front door key under a plant pot and hoping nobody finds it, tokenization is the equivalent of hiding the key and changing the locks to your front door every half an hour as well. And it just brings it a little bit to life. It's like the audience isn't stupid, so that, they probably have a bit of an idea, but it's that way of helping your expert to make something more tangible. The fifth one might sound a bit like a sales pitch, but it's really not. And you genuinely might need to bring in some outside help. And that's not because you're not capable of interviewing experts or creating great content. But I don't know if any of you have children, but it's a little bit like sometimes kids won't listen to their parents, but they'll listen to, a teacher or an aunt or somebody, because you don't always listen to the people closest to you. And sometimes with experts, it's really hard for the marketing department to get their attention. But if they say, look, we've got this expert from outside who's coming to talk to you, that can sometimes get them to pay attention. The other good thing about an outsider is that they can push back. So, if there's internal politics and, you can't really push back at your expert, an external person can do that in a very different way. Again, there's been loads of times where I've come off a call or the expert's left the call and I'm left talking to the marketer and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been trying to ask them that same question forever and they never talk to me. And, and it just can be quite useful. So almost halfway through the session. I think we should talk about, have questions and discussions. So just a really quick recap. One, you need actual experts if you're going to position your business as experts in your field. Obvious. Two, you need to work proactively with those experts. And then the challenges that you will face are, one, they're probably not marketers, so they're not going to be able to do it for you. Two, they're going to be busy, so you're going to have to convince them, and you're going to have to make it as easy as possible. Number three, they probably have too much knowledge or the yarn, so you're going to have, an ability to get through that. Four, need to be aware of unconscious bias, and when they're not aware that their audience or you don't have the full picture. And then, finally, you might struggle purely because of your internal position, and you might need to bring somebody in from outside. Breathe.
Thanks, Rin.
Lots of
Great.
information.
I love it. Whistle stop tour.
Yeah.
I love the key and the flower pot example as well in terms of taking
That's
that
cool, isn't it?
bring it to life. That's pretty cool.
I'd like to claim it's mine, but it wasn't. It was one of my team.
Always put it to the team, right? Question on key individuals in the company. In terms of the experts, do you tend to go for a type of person in the organization, as in somebody who just naturally wants to promote themselves rather than somebody who's kind of more insular? Is there a kind of view on seniority in the company? So more senior people are better for a profile to promote the company rather than more junior people?
No, not necessarily, because we don't even always like name them. It's not like we're doing direct quotes and stuff. It's normally it's essentially because sometimes people say to us, how can you write for our business if you're not experts in our subject? And what we always say is we don't need to be experts in your subject, because we're going to take the expertise from out of your business. Because, if I sat there going, oh, I'm a specialist, fintech writer, cool, okay, I've got a base knowledge of it, but I'm only ever going to bring what I know. So my content will, if I write content for your fintech company, it's not going to be any different from any of the other stuff that's out there. To make your content original, it's got to come from within your own company. So it's who's got the knowledge. And like I said, it's often, if it's a tech company, it might be a CTO, it might be the chief science officer, it might be the head of product. Sometimes it's a range of people. So, if you've got a bigger team, you might have, people responsible for different aspects. And again, it depends what type of content you're creating and for what part of the customer journey.
And is there, kind of natural kind of scaling up from like baby steps of you're taking kind of the written word up to you're recording video from somebody where it's coming from the heart of the business, it's coming from an individual, but that person needs to be able to be comfortable on camera and not to be too stilted and add personality to it as well?
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is that you get to know, as you're talking to the different experts, you get to know who are the people that they're going to come out with that perfect, brilliant soundbite. A lot of the time, the people who are really, really excellent experts, they're just not excellent communicators. So they're always going to have to talk to somebody who can filter it into sensible language or just make it warmer or whatever it is. And other people just freeze on camera and just can't speak. So, yeah.
Or naturally just raise their hands. Anyone who got other questions, jump in. Otherwise, I'll keep cracking on with mine.
Yeah, I've got a quick question there.
Yeah, go for it, John. Go for it.
So I've got a team of cloud consultants, and I think we've solved the people wanting to put time into kind of participating in the marketing, in that we've got a number of people who contribute to the blog. And I think that the challenge that we have is that people are willing and interested to spend the time on putting the content together. But as you've pointed out, right, they'll often speak to the wrong audience, or in too much detail, or kind of go off on a tangent, or maybe put 7 points in a post where maybe one would have done. And I guess I wonder whether your view is that this is something that's correctable and teachable through kind of editorializing, or whether it is better to sort of skip out having them write the content part and just make them available to a writer to generate the content on their behalf. Or whether there's a sort of balance of the two things.
Yeah, and there's different ways to do it, and it all depends on the resource you've got, whether it's time, people, budget. I would say definitely having really great editorial guidelines is helpful. So, here's what we need in an opener. Here's, the kinds of things we roughly work to 800 to 1,000 words in a blog post, or that sort of thing. So you can write that. In terms of tone of voice, it's useful, you know, if you've got somebody's name on a blog post, then they can slightly bring their own style to it. It helps a little bit. But also you could have one person. The other thing I just thought of was you could get people to essentially pitch. So rather than them writing a full post, you could get them to write, okay, I'd like to talk about this subject. The audience is going to be X. I'm going to make these 5 key points. So you can almost have like that templated, and they have to submit that to somebody. And then that was going to be my other point, is that it might be worth having like a content champion. So even if that person's just editing or pushing back, somebody who can just own that house style. But yeah, those are some ideas that could help as an interim. But yes, otherwise they could just maybe bullet point the whole lot and somebody else could write it.
Yeah, I think we've sort of we're heading in that direction. I think we've sort of tried to set some guidelines, and there is someone who's sort of leading that working group, if you like. But I think that the person who's leading that group it's a bit the blind leading the blind to some extent. It's not always clear to an engineer that the CFO doesn't fucking care what guard duty is or CloudTrail. You just have to kind of get to the much higher level, and then they feel like they're not showing their expertise. And so there's a sort of an emotional kind of, well, if I'm dumbing it down, am I really an expert? Like, well, yes.
Yeah, and that is a huge thing, and it's really interesting. You get, like, my job, what I find so fascinating about it is that I speak to so many experts, and you get to know that, and that is a classic thing that experts are like, but I have to tell you all of the stuff, because otherwise another expert's going to read it and they're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. It's like, doesn't matter about the other. I mean, it does, but you can write in such a way that the knowledge is implied, but you're only bringing forward the stuff that's needed. So sometimes training can help with that. So we do that sometimes, is we'll go in and train editorial teams, you know, and there's then mentoring as well. The problem with writing is it's one of those things you can't just learn in one go. So you can have the principles and you can do all of that, and then like, you know, I mean, I've been a writer for like 25 years, and I've learned by editors coming back and go, no, this wasn't right because, okay, do this because, and it's that slowly building it up, making lots of mistakes along the way.
Yeah, cool. That's really.
Can you adapt the content to make sure that it's clear who this is aimed at? So
sorry, the first bit again.
Can you adapt the content so you sort of make sure that you preface it, or that you caveat it with, look, this, I could go into ridiculous depths and lengths at this, but I'm not going to in this instance. That this is for a lay audience, for example, without patronizing them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. You probably need to be careful of not patronizing them, because I think most people would want to believe that they'd know more about things than they maybe actually did. But I guess it's if you've got different audiences. So like sometimes in, you know, with us, when we're working with like a smaller startup, we might be working directly with a founder. But when we're working with a big one, obviously there's normally a marketing lead. Sometimes it's an external marketing consultant. So we might, in the introduction of a blog post, we might talk about, like, you know, if you're a marketer, then this, if you're a founder, then that. So you can call it out that way.
I had a question. So I'm working in an AI startup, and I'm the only like person in charge of marketing. It's quite a small startup, and I work closely with a technical copywriter. And so, like, I guess what would you advise is the best kind of process to have in place when you have an external, like, freelance copywriter, and then like you have experts in the field, and I'm kind of like the middleman between the like expert content and then the copywriter. Like, what would you say is the best way to brief them and to give them feedback as well, if it's like a long-term collaboration?
So I think for me, and I don't do a lot of the writing in my company these days, but as a writer, I prefer to be able to hear straight from the horse's mouth. It's just so much easier to write well, and also you can clarify things that you don't understand. So especially if you are building that long-term relationship, if you're able to get them to lead briefing sessions, or at the very least be in briefing sessions, perhaps they're not the kind of personality that might ask the questions, but they might be in it. And what we do when we use freelancers is we always record our briefing sessions. So we then create a written brief, but we'd also send the recording because otherwise, basically, if you're listening to the expert and then you write a detailed brief, it's almost like, well, you might as well have written the copy yourself. So it's kind of sketching out, okay, we want to cover these things, and then here, listen to the expert speaking. So that's what we do with our freelancers. And in terms of feedback, I would suggest using like a live documents, a Google Docs or something like that, and getting the experts to comment. Again, they often need guidance as to how to comment, because especially if, you know, we're talking about that emotional feeling that they might have. Like, we've got a blog post on our website that we send to people, which is how to provide feedback to your copywriter. And it just helps people to understand also the different types of feedback. There's feedback on the angle, there's feedback on the language, on the structure. So again, there's a lot of nuance to it. And yeah, part of it is practice.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thanks, Rin. I've got a question, if that's all right. I was just, one of the challenge you must face a lot is just how to identify what's of interest to the audience of your clients.
Yeah.
So I'd be fascinated to hear kind of how you get to the bottom of that and work out, because obviously, you know, depending on the client, there'll be lots of different audiences at different levels or across a company.
Yeah, potentially. So, I mean, I would always suggest that, you know, wherever possible, you start with content strategy and really spend that time digging into what the audience is interested in, and that will go across the board from, you know, talking to your sales team. What are they facing when they're actually, you know, on the phone to people? What are the objections they're getting? What are things are people interested in? What are the, you know, the common things that they're facing? You know, literally going and looking on LinkedIn. What are people, you know, if you're like, right, we're going to be speaking to CHROs, great, okay, go and find some CHROs. What are they commenting on? What they're sharing? We're actually doing a piece of research at the moment about what CXOs read, and that's been really interesting. People often want stuff that's targeted at their industry vertical, so that's a nice easy win if you're able to produce enough content so that you can target specific industry verticals and talk to them and their industry. That's always helpful. But yeah, definitely doing that, digging first, is really, really important. And then thinking about, you know, are there maybe 2 or 3 different strands? Like, yeah, you might have. So for us, you know, we do work with sort of funded startups, but we also work with more established businesses, and they might have slightly different. We might have different things we want to say to different people. So you might go, okay, here are 3 key strands that we're going to be focusing on this year. You know, maybe Q1 is going to be focusing on one, or, you know, and actually just you've got to do that thinking and that prep beforehand, and then work out for each piece, okay, who is this going to be speaking to?
Is there value in possibly asking the experts what is of interest to them? Or do they not overlap with the audience that much?
Well, you do need to get a Venn diagram, because obviously, like, I don't know, if your audience is interested in something that you know nothing about and aren't selling, then like that's cool, they're interested in it, but that's like for somebody else to answer. So it's what you want to sell and promote and what you want to talk about and where your expertise is, where that overlaps with what they're interested in. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think of an example. The problem with experts is that they geek out on their subject, right? Like, they can talk about their subject. Like, I have a van I'm converting, right? I wouldn't say I'm a van expert, but because I'm converting a van, I can honestly talk to you about vans for hours. My other half is even worse. He has watched every YouTube video about like electrical diagram, and like, that's not interesting to anybody except somebody else like doing up a van. So then it's like, okay, if he's going to talk to somebody about, I don't know, about renting our van when it's done, he's not going to talk about the electrics. He's not going to geek out on that. He's going to talk about like, oh, look, it has solar, so you can go off grid for 2 days. Do you know what I mean? It's understanding which bits of your thing that you're geeky about are going to be the ones that your audience is interested in. I love that I crowbarred my van into my talk.
We've got a converted van as well.
Have you?
Yeah, Mercedes Sprinter. Not for this conversation, but
no,
We'll do another session on vans, don't worry, guys. We'll make sure whatever the audience wants. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Just a question that I had, I suppose, is that how much you're focusing on the content with the experts as close to the product that you're selling, right? So in terms of kind of where that is in the funnel and the kind of interest, if you're too close to, like, you know, it becomes more of a pitch of the product, then people are going to necessarily turn off for it. But But if you're too far up the funnel and it's too broad, then maybe it's, you know, not close enough to what you're selling, and therefore it's a bit of a step to be able to get to it. Where would you say on that kind of spectrum, was it down to different stages in the funnel?
I think that's the thing. You need content that can get people's attention and then lead them step by step. Because I really believe that content is brand building, really. There is conversion content, but more often than not, especially if you're in B2B, you've got a longer sales process. It really is about just getting them to the next step. Even when they're looking at you and considering you as a supplier, you've got to keep their attention, and you've got to keep reinforcing what they believe about you so that they eventually do choose to work with you. And you can use content as well as to get customer loyalty, right? So when somebody's with you, you know, it may be because they need to feel part of a community, or they may just need to believe that you still care once you've got their money, or, you know, so you do need to ultimately create content for the whole funnel. When we start with a client, if they've not really been doing any content, we often just start with one place or another, depending on what their problem is, either the bottom of the funnel and actually explaining, like, what is the product, what does it do, how can people interact with it, because that's like some of that basic sales stuff that they're missing. Their salespeople are good at doing it, but that relies on the salesperson being on the phone. We need something that's going to be online all the time. So it either starts there, or it's much more, right, we want to A, join, B, lead the conversation. So it's much more of that thought leadership stuff, which is, you know, more interesting, but they're both important.
Great, makes sense. Any other last questions from anyone? No.
Do you recommend running journalism training? It sounds like that would be a useful thing for marketers to have.
Journalism training. Yeah, I think everyone should start as a journalist, because this is the thing as well, is that, and especially, I mean, all the conversation around ChatGPT and just how much falseness there is out there. Like, genuinely, one of my colleagues, he was playing with it, and he in his spare time he hosts a Star Wars podcast because he's a big Star Wars fan, and he asked ChatGPT to recommend 5 episodes of his podcast, and ChatGPT did just that, but recommended 5 episodes that don't exist, just made them up, and it's like, oh, in this episode James and so talking about this. It's like, that literally doesn't exist. Whereas obviously as a journalist, you do a lot of media law training, and you have to like go back to the source, and you get trained as to, you know, how to really understand what a good source is, and etc, etc. So yeah, I think everyone producing content should probably have a little bit of training in that sort of thing.
ChatGPT and AI content is a whole nother discussion, whole nother shizzle.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot, Rin. I appreciate it, and thanks for the guys attending.
No worries. I'd love to connect on LinkedIn. So do find me on LinkedIn. I don't think hang on, I'm going to take a screenshot and then I get everyone's names. There you go.
Sounds good. All right, thanks, guys. See you at the next session.
All right, see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for organising.
All right, bye.
Cheers. Oh, thanks, Ed. That was awesome. What a great group.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? It's good fun. Thanks a lot. It's super useful.
Excellent.
And
Right. We'll catch you.
I prefer it when more people are interacting, right?
It's always good. It's always nice when people are chatting. So yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Then, mate, speak to you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.